My name is Luke Predmore, and I am founder of Beyond the Yellow. And today I have Karl Monger, the founder of Gallant Few, an amazing organization down in Texas. And Karl, let's have you tell people who you are and what you guys do.
Hey, Luke, I appreciate the opportunity to be on Beyond the Yellow. I'm an Army veteran, served on active duty from 1983 to 93. Usually I tell people back in the 1900s. And and I did some reserve time, and then had back surgery, and I was inactive by the time that 9/11 happened. And then I was at my 20-year mark. So I deployed to Desert Storm, but I did not deploy post 9/11. And a lot of the work that we do is directly related to my own experience while I was on active duty and then my own transition out. And a lot of my friends were, and let me back up just a little bit, because one of the key pieces to the founding of Gallant Few is an event that happened October 29th, 1992. 1st Ranger Battalion was doing a rehearsal for what was top secret, supposed to be an overseas mission. This is a year after the Desert Storm ground war had ended. And there were all kinds of rumors within the battalion about what we were going to go grab something. We didn't know if it was a who or if it was a something. But
Right.
we're doing a rehearsal. And because the Ranger Battalion's roll from readiness cycle to training cycle, we were getting ready to come off of the highest readiness cycle and go into a training cycle. And so the next Ranger Battalion was going to pick up that mission. So whenever the National Command decided to pull the trigger for it, then whichever battalion was in the hopper was the one that got to go, right? So
Mhm.
this mission was so important that when we did the rehearsal, Dugway Proving Ground, Colin Powell was on the objective watching. And he was Secretary of State at that time. So just to kind of give you an idea of the importance of the thing.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of pressure for this rehearsal to go. Because the training cycle, they brought leadership from the 3rd Ranger Battalion and overlaid it on 1st Ranger Battalion. So as we flew into Dugway Proving Ground, we went over the Great Salt Lake. And this is middle of the night. There was a very bad rainstorm. I was the assistant S3 of the battalion. I was in a C-141 over getting ready to airland after the helicopters had secured the airfield. And the helicopter that was carrying the 1st and the 3rd Ranger Battalion commanders crashed and burned the Great Salt Lake. And it killed 5 Rangers and 7 Air Force Special Operators. The only guy that survived was the pilot, because he was thrown clear of the wreckage. Horrible night. We didn't know for about 2 days what the actual manifest was, because as we reconfigured to go to the objective, an aircraft broke. So people got pulled off of aircraft in the middle of the night, rainstorm through. I mean, never in a million years should 2 Ranger Battalion commanders have been on the same bird, but that's the way that ended up working out. The Charlie Company First Sergeant Harvey Moore, who was a former Best Ranger competition winner, 2 Ranger RTOs, Meshack and Bird. As the assistant S3, I spent a lot of time working with them. And normally, if the battalion S3 didn't go with the battalion commander, I did. And so because of the mishmash on the birds, neither the battalion S3 or I was on that helicopter. So that there, but for the grace of God go I, it's one of those things. The S3 at that time, if I'm getting my memory right, and I'm trying to remember if he was the S3 or the XO at the time, was Joe Votel. And Joe Votel was the Ranger Regimental Commander on 9/11, retired, 4-star CENTCOM commander when he retired. So after that event happened, a lot of things in my life changed. Over the next 6 months, I decided to leave the military. I was at the 10-year mark, had 2 young daughters, had not spent a lot of time with them, because as an infantry officer and then the last 3 years in a Ranger Battalion, you're just never home. And so I decided I wanted to refocus on my family. And as I did that, I tried to transition into the reserve system, but that was like being on a bullet train and jumping off and landing on a stagecoach. Very, very frustrating experience. But I did it for a couple of years until there are all kinds of, and I'm going a little too far off base, but all this is important in the broader term, right?
Yeah.
There were at that time, and I'm assuming there still are now, a lot of disincentives to participate in things like Reserve and National Guard, depending on how you leave the military. So at the 10-year mark, the Army was doing a drawdown, so they had the opportunity to award bonuses like an early retirement to captains in my year group that wanted to get out. And so I took advantage of that program. Well, as soon as I got out, the VA awarded me a 30% disability rating for my back injury. And you can't draw that annual payment, the voluntary separation payment, and VA disability. So they automatically start deducting, right? And then when you do reserve time, when you do active duty for training time, you can't also draw the voluntary separation incentive. So again, it gets now this, what was supposed to be a $10,000 check every year for 20 years. Now, all of a sudden, as I got promoted to major and did 2 weeks active duty time, it's gone combined with the VA disability. So there was no incentive for me to, wouldn't you know it, somebody's ringing the doorbell right this very second, and I don't know if my wife is in a place where she can go get it.
It's all good. Go grab it.
Give me 1 second here.
Yeah.
So the bottom line was it didn't make sense for me to stay in the reserves because I had to take, at that time I was selling construction equipment. So I'll backtrack into that part of my transition. But if I sold one piece of equipment on the weekend, and that's when you talk to farmers and folks out in the country is on the weekend, then I would more than make up for any pay that I lost with the active duty pay. And so I would have to take 2 weeks off of work to do 2 weeks active duty and not get paid for it. So it's there wasn't a way to make it work. And so I went inactive, and I'm thinking this was 1997, 98. You know, the Army goes to war every 20 years. We just finished one with Desert Storm, so it's going to be a while, right? So but my crystal ball did not was not very accurate at that time. But anyway, backing up to as I left the military, I'm trying to go from being a captain in the 1st Ranger Battalion, where you walk into a room and everybody else is going to stand up and look at you, right? To the first job that I got was the safety and training director for a 7-Up bottler. And this little company, it had half of Colorado and most of Kansas, but not Kansas City. And I got the job because my brother-in-law's father did insurance, and he knew the guy that owned the 7-Up bottler, and they needed to clean up some of their stuff. So they specifically brought me in to clean up a lot of the bad operational practices. Yeah, I can see
that went fantastic.
So within about a month, they had nicknamed me Deputy Dog. And if I were to walk into the bottling room, they're not wearing, they're pressurizing bottles of pop, and they're not wearing their iPro. And so I'm having to tell them to get their iPro on, and they're telling me where I can stick the iPro, and I have no authority to do anything. It's a very, very frustrating experience. Even the vice president of operations, he would smoke over the manufacturing line while open bottles of 7-Up are going. He'd have a cigarette there, and I'm like, you can't do that. And so it was a very, very humiliating experience. That after a year, they promoted me to run all the warehousing, and after a year of that, I was done, and I left, and I used a connection. One of my buddies that actually was my best friend in high school, we had gone through the ROTC program, and I'd gotten commissioned a year earlier than him, but he got out a couple of years before me because he only did like 5 or 6 years, and I did 10. So he had a transition plan. He knew what he wanted to do. He got out. He lobbied to get hired to go into the construction equipment world, where he worked for a case dealer as their shop manager. So managing all the repairs and the preventive maintenance and all of that stuff. He had a team of mechanics, and he really enjoyed it. Well, about the time that I was very frustrated at the 7-Up job, he was getting promoted from shop manager. No, he had been promoted from that to sales guy. And at the time that I was frustrated, he was getting promoted from sales guy to branch manager. And so he wanted somebody to backfill him as the sales guy. And
Yeah.
so he reached out to me, and I knew he made really good money doing that. He reached out to me and he said, yeah, I'd like you to consider applying for this job. And I said, man, I've never run a tractor in my life. You know, I've bought a car before, so I don't have a lot of respect for salespeople. So I feel that would be a bad decision for both of us. And he said he knows from the military that I had discipline, integrity, and the ability to learn. And if I decided that I wanted to give this a chance, he would do everything he could to make me successful. And so it was funny because I said, yeah, I'll try it. And one of the first things they do is a personality assessment. And this personality assessment is they want salespeople that have big egos. And so this personality assessment is specifically looking for people with egos, right? And
Yeah.
so I'm going through this, and the personality assessment is like, would you rather command a battleship or plant a flower garden? And I'm like, man, I've been a company commander in the Army. I've kind of already done that. It could be nice to have a flower garden. So I picked flower garden. And at the end of this, he calls me up a couple of days later and he says, you know, you almost scored negative on the ego side. He said, your ego is so low, it's like off
Which
the
is
charts.
what I would expect from a Ranger.
Yeah. And so it took some work for him to convince his superiors that they should go ahead and hire me, and they did. And I did that for a couple of years, and I really enjoyed doing it. And then he and I worked together at a couple of different construction equipment jobs over the years, and he ultimately ended up being one of the founding board members with me when we started Gallant Few.
Nice.
As I left the military, I self-selected out of one of the most prestigious units in the military, right? And when I did that, I felt like I no longer belonged to the team. And so for a couple of reasons, the primary one being the death of my friends on that helicopter. The secondary one was things just changed in the unit. A new commander came in, he and I didn't see eye to eye. The military wasn't fun anymore. And so as I stepped out of that, I didn't want to tell people that I was a Ranger, because then they would ask questions about, you know, what's it like being a Ranger? And then I'd have to think about the crash and why I left the military. And so all of that stuff was really too painful to talk about. So I would have a couple of drinks and I would, divert it to something else. So I started telling people that I was an infantry officer. If I met somebody that I knew when I was in high school and they'd say, oh, I heard you went in the Army. You know, what'd you do in the Army? I'd say infantry officer. And they didn't know what that was. They didn't care what that was. Eyes glaze over. Let's move on to something else. But if I said Ranger, then there's questions. So I avoided talking about it. I avoided getting embedded with some of the veteran groups that are special operations focused, right? I didn't feel like I belonged to that team anymore. But because I avoided those people, I avoided the people that were the most like me, that were the folks that could have helped encourage me, help me find opportunities, you know, correct me when I'm going off track. And so I kind of avoided all that. And so over the 10 years between the time that I left active duty and the time that I reconnected with the Ranger community, I had gone through half a dozen jobs. I'd never saw anybody for mental health. Over medicate with alcohol is the preferred method to do that. The things did not seem to be as colorful, as bright. Steak didn't taste as good. Everything was just kind of dull. And then I ended up going through divorce. And about that time was when 9/11 happened, while all of this stuff was kind of coming to a head. And
probably brought all that back.
And to back up again to when I left the military, my last day on active duty was 1st of August, 93. And October of 93 was when 3rd Ranger Battalion got torn up in Somalia. And so, you know, I had a lot of guilt associated with that. If I had swallowed my pride, stayed in, just done whatever I needed to do, could I have, as a senior captain of Ranger Regiment, could I have helped make a difference there? Probably not, but who knows? So,
Yeah.
and then 9/11 happens, and I see on the news that Joe Votel had led the regiment into Afghanistan, and Stephen Bannock was the 3rd Ranger Battalion commander. And when I was the personnel officer at 175, before I became the assistant 3, Steve Bannock replaced me. And so he and I, shared the same desk for a month. And so there's all these parallel things, but they went this direction and I went way off that direction. And I still was in the Army Reserve system, although inactive, but I had access to Army email. At that time, it was much less secure than it is now. And so I fired off an email to Votel and kind of guessed at his email address based on what my email address looked like. And I got it. And I said, I'm proud, I'm jealous, wished I could be there. Please pass along the thanks of a grateful nation, everybody that's with you. And a couple of days later from Afghanistan, he responded to the email. And as we reconnected, this was in 2001, as we reconnected, he ended up inviting me to come to his change of command, which was in July of 2003. So almost exactly 10 years to the day since the last time that I was really involved in anything with the regiment. And I didn't want to go because now they've all jumped into the history books, literally jumped into the history books. And here I come to the reunion, like, why am I a strap hanger here? And so my plan was to go up to the back of the bleachers, Fort Benning. I knew exactly what the layout was going to be because I'd done it, a dozen times before. And so I'm walking up to the back of the bleachers with the intent of taking a couple of pictures and then sneaking out before anybody that I knew saw me. And there was a young Ranger standing there on the sidewalk with a clipboard. And he asked me my name, and I said, I need to know my name. And he demanded to know my name. So I told him. And he looks at his list and he goes, oh, you're on the list, follow me. And Votel had reserved a seat, center mass, front row, all the VIPs, and there's a seat with my name on it. And in that moment, he took all the bad stuff and just wiped it right off the board. And afterwards, I got a chance to talk to him for a minute, and it was one of those things where I felt like I'd been accepted back almost like I'd never left. And so that gave me the confidence to start talking to some of the guys that I knew. Now there's women there, but then it was only men. And as I'm talking to them, they'd been there ever since I left, right? And so now they did multiple trips to Iraq, multiple trips to Afghanistan. They were just starting to go into Iraq. And I could see in them the things that I had experienced and was still experiencing, right? Not talking to mental health, using alcohol or something else to the extreme so you don't have to deal with whatever it is you need to deal with. They're having relationship issues. They're hiding injuries, right? Because I never complained about any hip issues while I was in the Army because I wanted to keep jumping out of airplanes and doing that kind of stuff. And
if you're hurt, then you're broke.
Right.
Then they treat you like you're broke if you have any kind of issue.
Yeah. And 14 years ago, I had total right hip replacement. And the doctor said, it's probably wear and tear from the Army. And I had a very stiff hip the entire time that I was there, but I never had it looked at. The only reason that my back injury was in there is because I had a no kidding back injury that I had to go see the medics for. And then I went through physical therapy for a while. So that stuff was documented. If that wasn't documented in my records, then that VA disability wouldn't have happened. So it's one of those things that when you're in the environment, you don't talk about the issue. I mean, I think about how many blasts I've been around, how many times I've cracked my head either on a parachute jump or on something else. None of that stuff ever gets registered. And then later on down the road, you're sitting in front of some, I'll be polite and say some nug at the VA, and they want you to justify your injuries, and you're like, no, let me just tell you what I did, and you should automatically know the damage that occurred on my body. I'm not going to complain about every little ache and pain.
Right.
And so
Well, it
that,
feels gaslighting in a way because when you're in, they tell you suck it up, deal with
right.
it. Then you go to the VA, and they'll take care of it. Like just suck it up while you're here,
Yeah.
and it makes sense. It's just like when you're getting out and you're going through SRP, and they tell you, "Hey, just say everything's fine," because if you say there's an issue, they're going to drag this out for
Right.
another God knows how long. So just say you're fine, then go to the VA.
Move on out. Yep.
Right. And you get the VA and they're like, no, you said you were fine. And
Yeah. And then
yeah, it's
if
like
you
this.
start complaining about something, then they start looking at you sideways like, well, you never complained about this while you were on active duty, So then they subconsciously maybe start giving you the impression that you're making it up. And that
Yeah.
just, and
Kind
then you
of
get,
gaslights.
yeah, and then you get mad, and then they get an attitude, and then so hopefully it's changed. From what I've heard, it's changed a little bit since then.
A little.
Yeah, but the issue is still there, right?
Yeah.
So some of the procedures now I understand, at least in the Ranger Regiment, is when they go through their final exit physical, they have the opportunity to just take a blank sheet of paper and list everything that hurts. And so at least now you have something that's in your record that says, yeah, they mentioned these things, right? That's a great starting point. And the attitude in the unit has changed now more towards, hey, if something's going on, let's get you physically rehabilitated so that you can continue to fight, and not, oh, if you're hurt, you're not going to be able to keep up. Let's get rid of you. There's way too much
Yeah.
invested in that community and those individual soldiers to just toss them out when something starts to go, because every single one of them has some sort of an issue because of the nature of what you do. You can't
Yeah.
live that lifestyle and not go uninjured. So anyway, that's changing, but it's certainly not fixed yet. But anyway, so I've got all of this running around in my head as I'm observing these guys, and I had, in my civilian career, I felt like I'd kind of progressed up to where I was doing pretty well. I was managing a United Rentals branch. My buddy had moved over to United Rentals and became a district manager, and so he hired me to run one of the stores. And I've got 50 employees, and it's an $8 million operation. And I know in Wichita, Kansas, I know all the leaders that are in the Chamber of Commerce, and so I'm connected now in the town, and I felt like I can use the resources that I know in the town to, now we're 2003, so we're a couple of years into the war. We can make a difference for any soldier that's coming back to this community. And so the first thing that I do is I reached out to the Wounded Warrior Project, who I had donated to several years in a row, about $1,000. And the only thing that happened was they increased the frequency of the letters that asked for more money. So I went to the VA, and I talked to their volunteer folks and said, I'm connected. I want to help. I will go get connected to the I'm trying to remember the AW2 program at Fort Riley, because that's in Kansas. There's got to be some the men and women leaving the military. They're going to land here. Let's do whatever we need to do, whether it's building wheelchair ramps or whatever. And the VA said, well, yeah, come in and fill out our volunteer form, because on Saturday we need somebody to come push wheelchairs around. And I'm like, no, I'm thinking a little bit bigger than that. And so the net result was, everywhere that I went to try to volunteer and do something, it got shut down. One of the career diversions that I had in between construction equipment jobs is I went and ran a Big Brothers Big Sisters agency for a couple of years. And it sounds weird for a former Ranger officer who did construction equipment stuff to go do Big Brothers Big Sisters. But in 1969, when the program started, I was one of the first little brothers when the program started there in Wichita, Kansas. And the guy who had started the program was stepping out of that role after like 30 years. And so I saw this advertisement, and I'm like, yeah, they probably won't want me, but let me call them up. And when they heard about my background, they're like, well, this is golden. This is a great story. This would be great. So I went and did that, and that guy never left. So after a couple of years of him and I kind of butting heads
Yeah.
about the way things should be, I decided to go back to the construction equipment world. But so because of my experience as a kid and then my experience in that agency, I'm thinking, what if there was something like Big Brothers Big Sisters for veterans? So let's start with Rangers. If a Ranger is leaving Savannah, Georgia, and they're going to go live in St. Louis, Missouri, and they want to study accounting, can I find a Ranger veteran that lives in St. Louis who is a CPA or owns an accounting firm? Because what better way than to get them aligned based on military service and then based on whatever the civilian occupation that they might be interested in, get them connected along those lines. And so we started doing that. But coming from Wichita, Kansas, and trying to connect with Ranger battalions is with the gap in experience that I had with them now, right? That was a really difficult thing because I didn't know most of the people that were in the leadership positions now. I knew a few of them, but not very many. And so I'm periodically going to Fort Benning and I'm talking to leadership. Here's what I can do to help you guys. But in the meantime, I've got people in Wichita, Kansas that are saying, hey, this would be a good thing to help us. And so from 2004 to 2009, I used social media, primarily LinkedIn and Facebook, to start building out a network of Army Rangers and then later on other veterans. And so by the time 2009 rolled around, I had 1,000 Rangers in the network and I could get a Ranger connected pretty easily anywhere in the country. The guy who had, his name is Bill, the guy who had helped me move into the construction equipment world, he and I are sitting down having a beer and I'm telling him about this Big Brothers Big Sisters idea. And he reached into his wallet, pulled out a $100 bill, and he slid it across the table. And he said, well, here's your first donation. Why don't you make a nonprofit and get going? So he became one of the founding board members of the organization. And in 2010, Gallant Few became a 501c3 nonprofit. And our initial mission was Big Brothers Big Sisters for veterans. And what that turned into was we were now an EMS program for veterans. So if somebody referred somebody to me, so I'm still working on getting Rangers and people are referring Rangers to me and I'm connecting them. But then also somebody is calling me up and they're saying, hey, Joe Schmo over here is, his phone just got shut off and he's trying to get a job. And so I'm like, well, let me pay his phone bill for 3 months and help give me his code. I'll go on to Verizon's website and I'll pay forward his phone bill, give him a credit. So at least he can get a job interview call. So we started doing little bits and pieces like that. The more that I got into that, the more I started asking questions like, why can't you pay your phone bill? And then I would uncover these other issues, right? So now we need to start going backwards into their experience and why are you at a point where you can't pay your rent, can't pay your phone bill, whatever that is, and let's go get those things fixed. And I had to go through this. This was something I thought was because I left the military as a captain. I felt like I connected with soldiers better than if I had left the military as a colonel or higher, right? Because a company commander will sit down with a soldier and go through a budget, right?
You're still interacting with the soldiers.
Exactly. Exactly. And so I would say, bring all your bills. Let's lay them all out. Why are you paying $150 a month for cable when you can't pay your phone bill? Right. So what I recommend you do is, painful as it is, pause that for a little while. You don't need to have Netflix right now. You need to worry about, the basics. And so, the way soldiers are, payday comes and they go down to Victory Drive and they buy a ring for the stripper they met the week before, and they don't think about the 25% interest rate on the loan. And so anyway,
I was generalizing the other day about how the veterans, like so many of them, especially these guys that came right out of high school, they've never had more than a couple $100 in their pocket.
Right.
They get out and they go and it's like, hey, I've got all this money, and they just burn through it. And it's crazy how people will survive for years doing that, where everyone's burned through everything, but hey, you're on post, so you've got your meals and
don't have to worry about food together.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting dynamic because you have that, and on top of that, the reality where you're you're not just not supposed to make decisions. It's not that you're like, oh well, you can get by without making them. If you make decisions on your own, you're going to be punished. Like especially, and I get it coming from an infantry background myself.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, they will rip into you, and then you go to the civilian world, and it's like, hey, now make all your decisions, and it becomes so overwhelming.
Yeah, just put it on a military star card. You'll be fine.
Right.
And yeah, so yeah, I talk to people that have been out of the military for 10 years that are still keep paying off a balance on a military star card. And so having some basic conversations about how do you manage credit, how do you build savings, all of that is extremely important. And a lot of them never get that when they're in the military. They never got it from
Yeah.
their family beforehand. So they're, so what happens, what I started to observe was when somebody leaves the military, they got a couple of years where they're doing okay because they haven't run into a ton of roadblocks, right? And they might have a little bit of money. They've got a couple of years of VA healthcare, so and their GI Bill, or if they're in Texas, even Hazelwood Act. So they've got money coming in as long as they go to class, and that money is enough to pay for a place to live and some food. But they really don't know what they want to do. So for 4 years, they're in school paying for everything, but then they pop out the other end with a degree in marketing, but nobody's going to hire them because they don't have any experience and they really don't. Now you have somebody that's older because of their military experience. They carry the stigma of being a military veteran. And now this is going back 15 years, right? To
Yeah.
as the wars were really kicking off, and people in the country were very supportive of the military, but less supportive of the veterans because they're the ones with PTSD and they're the ones that are going to cause a problem. So it
Mhm.
so now you've got people that are coming out with an education that they can't market, they can't use. And so now the money starts dwindling fast. When the money starts going downhill, then the relationships start going downhill. Then people are going through divorces or breakups. They're and there's at one point when I did presentations, I had a glide path, and it was leaving the military, and it was having financial issues, and it was using alcohol, and it was having the VA tell you it's not service connected, and it was having more financial issues, ultimately down to where your significant other says, I am done with this crap. And that's when somebody
Yeah.
starts thinking about taking their own life. So that glide path can take 10 years. So you have somebody that when they leave the military, they look like they're doing okay. They go through school doing okay, and then all of a sudden everything just starts going downhill. So how do we interrupt that? How do we get in front of that process and stop that from going on? And now again, Gallant Few at that time had no money in the bank, right? We're trying to, anybody that comes to us, yeah, we'll do whatever we can to do to help you. I mentioned Wounded Warrior Project earlier. Now we have a partnership where we're working with Wounded Warrior Project through the Ranger community. We've got Rangers that are service officers at the Wounded Warrior Project that are helping Rangers to get VA disability benefits. But
Nice.
one of the biggest issues that I have with that organization is it says Wounded Warrior Project. It doesn't say Wounded Warrior Project post 9/11. So if
Right.
you're a Desert Storm, Vietnam, any of the in betweens, they won't do anything for you. And so when you look at the VFW American Legion, those are more social type things. They have their service officers, right, where they'll help with VA claims. But if you go check into a VA post, more likely than not, it's going to revolve around their bar. And
Yeah.
so it's
I,
not.
I've tried reaching out, trying to get some community there, and yeah, it's like, hey, let's drink and just complain about stuff, and it's like,
But the people that go to the VFW, for the most part, the ones that I've been to are not veterans. They're sons of veterans. So they're American Legion or VFW auxiliary members. And to actually, when you look at the total number of people that are there at any given time. Now, this is my experience where I've been here in the DFW area. About, I'd say, more than half are family members, sons or daughters of veterans, and not veterans themselves. So it becomes a completely different dynamic. And you think you're talking to somebody that served in the military, and then you find out, no, their dad did. And so anyway, it
different.
It becomes a kind of more of an awkward, it's harder to connect. And then that makes it harder to try to connect again, because that you put yourself out there a little bit and then you found out that wasn't anyway. So through all of this, as Gallant Few started to gel, I got connected with the Burris Institute. Dr. Kelly Burris developed a program that he calls subconscious restructuring. And it's a 3-hour workshop that is based on, actually I have one of the textbooks here. Let me grab it. That's what it looks like.
Okay.
But it, in the 3-hour online seminar, it's an education in how your subconscious drives everything that happens in your life. And it all starts with your internal self-talk. And if you're trying to change a habit or behavior that you know is not working out in your long-term benefit, it's hard to do that, especially if you've done it for a long time, right? Anger is one of them. A lot of veterans' initial response to being frustrated is they get angry. And that anger causes them to do things that are not in their long-term best interest, relationship-wise, legal-wise, job-wise, whatever. So when they have that little outburst and they yell at their significant other, now they feel guilt. What are they saying to themselves in their head? And a lot of times that internal self-talk takes the form of why questions. Why can't I control my anger? Why can't I be a better partner? Why can't I whatever? And how do you answer a why question? Usually starts with the same word, and that word is because.
I am. Yeah.
Because I have PTSD, because my partner is a jerk, because my parents didn't give me a good example, because I got screwed over at work. But all the becauses make it okay for you to be angry, which means you're going to continue to be angry, even if it doesn't work out for you. And so the workshop helps you change that from why can't I to what actions can I take to control my anger, be a better partner, make more money at work, lose 10 pounds, whatever, right? And that simple change of thought process starts to move you in a different direction. And when you combine that with a self-image of who you want to be, when, let's say, the subconscious restructuring workshop focuses on 4 main areas of life: love, health, wealth, and self-image. And it asks you to consider what are your absolute musts in each of those areas. And if you take love, for instance, I absolutely must be a better husband. And then it takes you through a thought process. Why must you be a better husband? Well, because I've been divorced once. I don't want that to happen again. Okay. So what's one thing that you could do that might prevent you from getting a divorce? I could control my anger, or I could plan a weekly date night, whatever that thing is, right? When you don't do that thing, what excuse do you give yourself? So you're writing these things down, right? And then
I like it.
The last one is, what questions do you ask yourself about this issue? And so it's all derived at identifying where you're doing the whys, or where you're doing the closed-ended, right? Am I a better husband? If the answer is no, then you're stuck. What are you going to do? So you want it to be, what actions can I take to be a better husband? What actions can I take to plan date night? What actions can I, right? And then if your objectives in love, health, wealth, and self-image are all accomplished to your satisfaction, now what does your life look like? And that image of what your life looks like with all of your objectives accomplished, that becomes your subconscious self-image. And that self-image, now you use that to drive your future behavior. right? This person that I want to be, you start to believe that you are that person, right? I am that person, not I'm going to be that person. And then when a situation arrives in front of you, you want to react as the new self-image, not the old self-image. And
Yeah,
so
there's so much there.
What's that?
There's so much there that what you're talking about the last few minutes there, like that could be a whole series of conversations. And
Oh yeah.
that's like, yeah, the whole, it's interesting, like as you're talking about this here, and it's like, man, all these kind of steps that you've gone through in the phases, it's so similar to what so many veterans go through. And you're explaining it in these ways that it's so, like, I recognize for myself when I got out, I went through kind of similar issues and path, and you don't realize it at the time.
Right.
You don't realize what's going on. You don't realize, that glide path you're describing is like, God, that's spot on. And we sit there and blame it on different things, like you said, the why. And it's interesting. I heard a guy a while back who's talking about NLP type stuff and subconscious processing, and he's like, stop asking people why. He's like, stop asking people why, because when you ask them why, they're going to actually create a different reality than what's actually going on to justify that why. And it's wild because you see so many people that we take a defensive moment where they get they act irrational or something out of defensiveness, out of hurt, and then we take that little moment and we turn it into the reality, into the whole system, by asking why did these things happen. And as you're talking about that with the, don't think about who you want to be, but who you are. That's what I even deal with. Like, I've been working with my kids actually. It's something I recently figured out that, like, wow, like, you guys are talking about who you want to be and trying to act like the person you want to be, but that is constantly reinforcing that you're not that person, and it becomes performative. I was like, well, of course we can't hold that until you start, like you said, going, this is who I am now. Even if I haven't acted that way today, I am that person. Yeah,
Bruce Lee's sister wrote a book that was released during COVID. I want to say it's called Mind Like Water. And it was about his philosophy on life. And one of the things that I did not realize that I learned when I read the book was Bruce Lee had his own subconscious self-image written on a note card, and he kept it in his pocket. And it said something to the effect of, I am the highest paid, most famous martial arts practitioner, movie star of all time, something like that. And anytime anything happened that made him self-doubt, he would pull that out and he would read it. And it was, I am, not I will be. Before anybody knew who he was, he did this. So he had this image of who he was, just nobody else knew it yet, right? And so living like that causes you to act like that. So you're acting like who you are, not who you are in terms of the perfect you, not who you are in terms of the flawed you, right? And so everybody's going to slip every once in a while, but then it's, what can I learn from that? How do I get back toward moving towards this with all my objectives being complete? So after going through this, Dr. Burris has an assessment that he does at the beginning of the workshop that's called, he calls it a step 1 emotional checklist. And that's like a 7-step thing that you go through. But step 1 is the checklist, and it has you rate statements like, I want to say, he does his a little bit, somewhere on the negative. It's like, I don't believe life is worth living, or something like that. And it's not at all to 10 a whole bunch. And so you get these they're all kind of emotional. You get this rating, and it's not good or bad. It's just where you are in that moment. And then after you get done with the workshop, you do another one. And then you compare, have you moved the mark in any way? So I liked that a lot because I think that measurement and accountability are huge for military people. And so I developed an assessment that we call the Azimuth check. And as Gallant Few started to develop into the EMS team that tried to do anything for anybody at any time, anywhere, to how do we measure what we do, and how do we actually focus in and hone the resources that we're starting to develop. And the Azimuth check was a way to do that. So our philosophy towards veterans, and it really doesn't matter if you're a veteran or not, it applies to anybody. But in terms of veterans, we call it the Gallant Few STAR. And STAR stands for self-training and responsibility. And it could be STAR A because we say response dash ability. Stephen Covey wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People back in the 1980s.
Phenomenal book.
Right, yeah. I got to meet him twice when he was alive.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, it was, matter of fact, when I wrote a book on military transition, when I give anybody a copy, I always, in the front, I put be a trim tab. And that was what he wrote inside of my book. I had a copy of his highly effective 7 Habits book, and he wrote, Carl, be a trim tab, and he signed it. And he handed it back to me. I look at it, and he goes, you're not a sailor, are you? And I said, no, I'm not. And he said, well, a trim tab is the little piece that connects to the rudder. So you've got how you control the ship with the wheel, right? And you got whatever the linkage that goes down, and then there's this little tab that connects to the rudder, and that's going to move the rudder. So he says, like, the smallest piece on the ship has the biggest impact in the direction it goes. So he said, be a trim tab, right? Basically turn the ship. If it's not going the right direction, turn the ship. So I like that, and I've used that since then. But he said, in any situation in front of us, we have the ability to choose our response. And I say this to married veterans all the time: your spouse can't make you angry. It's not physically possible for your spouse to make you angry. You choose anger based on their input. But the minute that you realize that you're choosing anger, that means you can choose something different than anger. Now you start to inject control into something that they thought they didn't have any control over. So responsibility is a huge part of the Gallant Few system. The self-training part is we can give you the tools, but you got to practice it. You got to do it, right? When you're in the military, you take the old style PT test with push-ups, sit-up, 2-mile run. Everybody has their own hack on how do you max out your push-ups. The reality is, if you want to do more push-ups, you have to do push-ups, right? Bench press isn't going to help you. Crunches aren't going to help you. You just got to do push-ups, and they're not pleasant to do, but you just got to do it, right? So same thing goes with this. You see what you need to do, and then are you actually, do you have the ability to put into practice the things that we're talking about? So self-training and responsibility is the STAR. The STAR has 5 points. Each point is an area of functional fitness. And usually when I say functional fitness to somebody, they think CrossFit, right? Functional physical fitness. Physical fitness is one of the 5 points, but the other ones are emotional, professional, spiritual, and social. And each one of those 5 areas, we have 5 statements that we have a veteran rate from 1 not at all to 10 a whole bunch. And in the emotional, I'm confident in my ability to make the best decision for me, 1 to 10. I believe life is worth living, 1 to 10. In professional, I have a budget and I follow it. I'm confident in my job security. In social, I can have a good time without alcohol. I'm surrounded by people who love and care about me. In spiritual, I'm here for a purpose. I get outside and enjoy nature. And then on the physical one, I have a intentional physical fitness plan. So we get this 1 to 10 scale on each statement, 25 statements in each of the 5 areas, and 1 overall. So I have a radar chart that I can show a veteran. You know what a radar chart is? It kind of looks like an exploding star. where each of the 5 areas has their own average. And you might have one side that's all 7s and 8s, and then all of a sudden you got a 4. So if that was a tire rolling down the road, that would, every time it went over, be ka-thunk, ka-thunk. So that might be the first area that you want to take a look at. How do you round it out so that holistically, your life is maybe a little bit more balanced? And then we start off with that assessment. We offer them the subconscious restructuring workshop. If they're within Texas, Colorado, or Georgia, that's where I'm licensed to practice. I can do clinical counseling in those states. And then we come back a month later, we do another azimuth check, and now let's compare the two. Let's see if you're moving your mark. And one of the statements in the physical one is, I have someone holds me accountable for my fitness goals. Someone holds me accountable for my fitness goals. And a lot of times they'll score that low, like a 2 or 3. I don't have anybody that holds me accountable. Okay.
Right.
Do you need somebody to hold you accountable? Well, no, because I like to go do long distance running. Okay, then the 2 is not an issue. Leave it. We won't worry about that. Next time, score to 10. But the issue is, do you need somebody like in the military? You got to show up for PT, right? So if you're not a PT formation, you're going to get yelled at. You're going to get in trouble. So you got accountability baked in immediately. You got to be at formation. You got to be there, and somebody leads you through the exercises. You leave the military, one of the first things that goes out the window is, I don't have to do PT anymore. I don't have to get up early anymore. So now after a year, you put on 10 pounds, 20 pounds, your back's hurting, right? You look in the mirror, you're not very happy with yourself. Would it help you if you connected with somebody that you could hold each other accountable and say, yeah, I'll meet you at the gym 3 times a week, or we'll go for a walk 3 times a week, whatever it is that works for them. But now you have somebody that's waiting for you to be there, which means, I gotta do my walk today at 6 o'clock. I'm meeting Joe over at the park, right? So he's expecting me. That's an important thing to do. The other piece about accountability is in the suicide prevention. Did you ever know or talk to Boone Cutler?
Boone Cutler, no.
Boone Cutler passed away about a year ago. He was a GWAT veteran, PsyOps veteran. He wrote a couple of books. He did a radio broadcast out of Reno, Nevada, called The Tipping Point, if I remember right. But Boone was a very outspoken advocate for veteran anti-suicide campaign. And he developed a thing called the Spartan Pledge. After about 5 or 6 years of being out, one of his teammates committed suicide. And so as they're planning the memorial and he kind of gets connected, he reaches out to another of his teammates that he hadn't talked to in a while. And Boone is, in his back of his mind, he's always had suicide because of some of the things that he had to do when he was in Baghdad. And so he had definitely had moral injury, and we can talk about moral injury before we're done. We can come back to that. But Boone had a lot of guilt from the things that happened. He would meet with somebody one day and ask them questions about what was going on in the community. And the next day, that person's head would be in the middle of the town square. So he carried a lot of guilt for that kind of stuff. So he reaches out to one of his buddies, and he goes, who he hadn't talked to in like a year. And he said, and Nacho was his name. And he said, hey, Nacho, what do you know about this PTSD stuff? Do you think there's any validity to that, like for guys like us? And Nacho said, man, I haven't left my apartment except for groceries for a year. And Boone was like, man, Nacho's going down a path where he's going to commit suicide. And so Boone immediately, instinctively said, don't you kill yourself until you call me first. And they agreed. And Boone developed that into the Spartan Pledge. And the Spartan Pledge is something that we've rolled into our programs now. And it says, I promise not to take my own life by my own hand until I talk to my battle buddy first. My mission is to find a mission to help my warfighter family. He always said, a warfighter without a mission is a dead warfighter. And so if you don't have a mission, your mission is to find a mission. So you always have a mission. You just have to be self-motivated to go do it. And when people take that pledge with each other, when you have somebody, the most powerful one is when they serve together, right? Because somebody that you served together with overseas, when you say, I promise not to kill myself until I call you first, then you're going to call them, even if it's to say goodbye. And when
Yeah.
you reach out, now you have the opportunity to be reminded that you're loved and respected and needed. And odds are that you're probably going to find a way to keep on going. So that Spartan pledge, Boone has saved thousands of veterans from committing suicide through the Spartan pledge. And
That's amazing.
yeah, and he came back from his deployment, and he had, I don't know if it was a burn pit thing or something, but it weakened something in his heart. And so about a year ago, he had a massive heart episode and passed away.
Oh man.
He was about 40, I think.
You know, it's amazing how much of that stuff, you know, impacts, like you're talking about, like the physical health. You have stuff like burn pits or whatever in your service that it destroys your body, even if it's just the chronic stuff from like, hey, we're gonna go running, and you know, then your knees and your back get shot, and those things, it impacts your physical ability. But then when you get out, like, I think there's so much to the whole, like I remember being in, and it was constantly beat into us every day that, you know, our only purpose on this earth was to do bad things to bad people, and you have no value outside of that. And then you get out, and like I said, now you got to find value in that there's no
outside of violence.
Right. And not only that, but you have to be, like you're saying, kind of ashamed of what you did. You know, I want to go back a little bit earlier. You were talking about the like when you're trying to get a job and trying to downplay or not let people know that you're in the military. I remember one of the first jobs I interviewed for, and it was for a management job. I go in, and the guy I'm interviewing with, there was actually two of them, and one of them he's just sitting there looking so checked out. And you know, we get to a point, I was like, hey, like, you have something you want to ask me or say, like, and he just goes, you know what, I've worked with a lot of you infantry guys, and y'all come in drunk, you cuss at people and all this stuff. And he's like, well, why would I think you're going to be anything different? And I'm sitting there like, well, I don't really know how to answer that. You know, I mean, I left the military, so I don't want to be in that environment. But you get so much of that kind of shame that gets put in. And then, like you're saying, you make these little mistakes and things along the way that builds into that.
And you think that everybody that looks at you knows.
Right. Well, I had another, so I went to school for physical therapy, and actually I remember at one point when I was in clinicals, and I had a point where I go in and they were, everything was going good. And then I had a different person, like the person who was my supervisor was gone for the day, had someone else step in, and they were telling me to do things very different with these patients and everything. I was like, all right, well, I'll do it the way you want me to. And they're like, well, why are you doing it this other way? Like, well, because that's how this other person told me that I should do it. My job is to learn, you know. And they kept pushing, like, well, you need to make your own decisions. You need to do all this. Like, guys, I'm here to learn. I'm here to figure out from everyone. And they just kept pushing. And it got to me, I was like, I'm getting really, really uncomfortable here, getting real elevated. I need you to back off. And they took that opportunity to go, oh, well, if you can't handle confrontation here, and kept driving in. And it's like, man, believe me, that's not the problem. And it got to a point where I ended up having to get escorted out. And, I remember coming back in and talking to people the next day. And this person was like, well, they're like, hey, didn't he tell you he has PTSD? They're like, well, yeah. And he told you this was getting elevated and back off. Well, yeah, but he seems fine. Like he said he's got this issue, but he seems fine. So how am I supposed to know that he's got an issue here? And it's like,
Yeah.
It's like, so if I am losing my crap, if I'm not holding it together well, then I'm going to get penalized. But at the same time, if I'm going in and handling everything well, then I communicate properly. Hey, this is not like we need to de-escalate here, and be like, oh well, you seem like it's fine, so it's okay. We're just going to ignore that. And it's like, what do I need to do? Come in and pop someone in the face once a week, just to be like, just a reminder, got stuff going on here. And it was interesting because it ended up being an in-service they had me do with people. And I realized so many people don't understand anything about PTSD besides, hey, don't sneak up behind them and don't pop a balloon. Like, other than that, they don't understand. And it's really hard to communicate to people that, especially people who've been in combat zones, where you're around people who think differently, act differently, who a lot of times, like at least in Afghanistan, we had people that would be acting friendly to get you to drop your guard. And it creates this mentality where you're looking for the betrayal flags. You're looking for that stuff.
When you start from a level of mistrust, not trust.
Right. And then it's like, well, shoot, now if y'all, so like, okay, so we need to how do we need to act around you? It's like, oh, that's like, I don't even know. Because if you act differently around me compared to other people, that's going to be a problem. It's going to really win. Yeah. And we don't, you don't quite realize even like how much the PTSD is impacting us. Another one, I remember there's a point where it was a couple of years after I gotten out, and it was weird. My resting heart rate was like, I was still in pretty good shape. But my resting heart rate was like in the 120s.
Wow.
And yeah, it was always elevated. And what was interesting is I ended up getting a position in a criminal psych, mental health type building. And, I got there and the person was like, hey, we need someone, no one stayed here for more than a few months, and we need someone that can be comfortable around these, violent people. What was interesting is I started noticing one day, I looked at my Fitbit, my heart rate was down in the 60s when I go into that building. And every day at like 10 o'clock, it would have a weird jump.
Huh.
We had a staff meeting every day at 10. And it would go right back down. And I was like, this is super weird. And I remember talking to my psychologist at the time, and he looks at me, he goes, that's really weird. Why would your body feel more comfortable around violence than around normal everyday interactions after spending years being trained and conditioned to deal with violence? That's so weird. And of course, my first response is like, well, screw you.
Right. Duh.
Like, yes. Like when you put it that way, it seems very obvious, but it makes so much sense for so many vets that when they come out of being trained to be comfortable in conflict, in all of that. Now, our response to how we deal with conflict is 0 to 100, but in a lot of ways, they're almost looking for that. And I think that's where a lot of people, they feel like it's, oh, well, PTSD, they're scared of conflict. And it's like, are they scared of it, or are they looking for it while simultaneously being worried that they're going to respond too much? Because that's what they're trying to do. That's what they're comfortable doing.
Yep.
We're a lot less comfortable with all the other little social things that go on. Like you talked about, working a job where you go in and you tell them, hey, this is what you need to do. And people are, well, how does that make them feel? Like, it doesn't matter. This is what we're supposed to do. And it's so hard to get out of that mindset. And like you said, the whys start kicking in, and that all that subconscious stuff that blocks all of this it's hot. It's a lot to deal with. It's very hard for a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the thing is to think about what your ideal life is, and then how do you create a path to get there. And we use the other part about the star system is we use land navigation and a lens-attic compass as an example. Because if you're going to navigate successfully through the woods, especially at night, you've got to know 3 very key things. And the first one is what?
Yeah, I know where the North Star is.
Let's say you can't see it because of the trees. And you got a compass, right? You got a map and a compass.
Yeah.
So what's the first thing you got to know?
You got to orient to the compass.
Where am I? You got to know where
on the ground I'm at and orient everything. Yeah.
The old ranger instructor would have you grab a pine needle off a fir tree and use the pine needle to show on a 1 to 10,000 map exactly where you are right now. So you got to know your starting point. And the next thing you got to know is your destination. And only when you know those 2 pieces of information can you shoot an azimuth. And if you're, especially if you're following at night and you're following those little glowing dots, you're relying 100% on staying online to get to your objective. And a lot of times objectives have dog legs built in, because you're not going to go 20 clicks on one azimuth, right? You're going to shoot an azimuth to a creek intersection or to a hilltop or to a road or something, but you're going to, you want to make sure you're on path. You got to check in, right? Make sure that you're, but then as you're moving through the forest, you walk through spiderweb. There's a big tree that's knocked down in front of you. There's a ravine. There are these things that they take you off azimuth. You can't walk in a straight line through the forest. But after you get past that obstacle, you got to get back on your azimuth, or you're not going to get to your objective. So as you think about if you're off azimuth even a degree or 2, and you're going several kilometers, you're going to miss your objective by a pretty wide margin. So it's important to always get back onto your azimuth, right? So take that into your life. When we do the azimuth check, that's where we are right now today. That's identifying emotionally, physically, spiritually, professionally, socially, where you are. Then when you look at that and you say, you know what, my overall emotional fitness score is a 7 out of 10. I would like it to be a 9 out of 10. Okay, so if your emotional fitness was a 9 out of 10 instead of where it is today, what's the difference in your life? Can you identify what that difference might be? Maybe it's a better relationship. Maybe it's getting treatment for post-traumatic stress. Maybe it's, who knows?
Yeah.
But that now becomes destination. So now that you have starting point and destination, now what do I need to do to get to that destination? And that's where, well, what are the options? There's counseling, there's joining certain groups, there's whatever. So for everybody, it's different, right? When you look at the spiritual side, I get outside and enjoy nature on a regular basis. Somebody never gets outdoors. They're 3 out of 10. And they go, you know what? I really would feel better if I was outdoors a lot. Okay, so if you were an 8 out of 10 instead of a 3 out of 10, how much more outdoor time is that? Right? Well, maybe, well, I would be doing a walk every weekend on a path. Okay, what do we need to do to get a walk every weekend on a path? Right? So that's starting to move towards the action steps. And when you think about long term, you talked about the physical fitness thing a minute ago. Well, I encourage veterans to identify what do they like to do for fun physically, and what do they do physically for work. So if you're sedentary and you sit at a desk all day long, or if you work at an Amazon factory and you're carrying boxes all day, your fitness plan needs to accommodate those things, right? So if you're sitting around a lot, your fitness plan better get you off your butt and moving. If you're moving all day carrying around boxes, your fitness plan probably needs to be on flexibility and core strength and things like that. But if in the wintertime you like to go to Colorado and go skiing, then when you're in Texas in June, you better be doing something in the gym that's going to get you ready to ski when wintertime comes around, right? Or you're going to go out on a ski slope and you're going to have a half a fun day and then you're going to be miserable the rest of the time. So it's looking at, we talk about my fitness plan is focused on work and play, right? And then it's intentional. So if I want to, I like to go to Colorado and I like to hike big mountains. So if I'm going to do that, then I probably need to do the Stairmaster at the gym here when I'm not in Colorado, right? So it's otherwise I'm not going to be able to get to the top of a 14er and enjoy the view because I'm just physically not able to do that. So it's always having a plan. Where do you want to be? What's that look like? And what do I need to do to get there? And when you start living like that, you start making the changes that will make your life better. Too many veterans live by accident. The job that they have is because they needed a job, and so they applied at 25 different places, and one of them called them back and they got a job, right? It wasn't really, 20 years from now, if they look back and go, man, that's not the job that I would have taken if I had known, right? So start to think now, where do you want to be in 20 years? And then start building your plan so that you can achieve that. Otherwise, tomorrow is always going to be the same as today.
Yeah. And that's, I like what you're saying there. They live on accident. They aren't being intentional, and it's hard because they don't have that when they come out. Again, don't make decisions, and then because if you make a decision, then you're just doing your own thing, and now the whole now this person's going to die. Oh, okay, I won't do that. But then they come out and they build habits of just getting through and not being intentional because they don't know what to do. And nothing feels meaningful, for a lot of them.
Right. And meaning is not going to magically come land on their head.
Right. And then they're sitting there going year after year, oh man, I'm just feeling terrible. I don't have any purpose anymore. I don't have any value. My physical health is deteriorating, and and it's just more validation of all of the things that are not who you used to be.
Viktor Frankl wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And Frankl was a psychologist in Poland pre-World War II, Jewish. So he ended up in Auschwitz. And I've had the opportunity to visit Auschwitz where he was imprisoned. Horrible, horrible place. And while he was in Auschwitz, he survived. His wife and teenage daughter did not survive. They were in a different camp, but he didn't know for years what happened to them. But he noticed of the people that were in the camp, there were two major categories of people. And they were those that were going to die and those that were going to live. And when he got down to what was the difference between the two? It wasn't in how healthy they were. It was whether or not they had a plan for the future. If they could envision life outside the wire, that prison camp, and they could plan rebuilding their business or writing their book or reuniting with loved ones, if they could maintain that dream, they had a much greater likelihood of surviving. If they could not see outside the wire, they were going to die inside the wire. And a lot of veterans create their own prison camp for themselves, and they can't see a way outside of that. And if you can't see a way outside of that, you can't plan a path to get there.
That's, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's, you have to have that reason. You have to have something that's keeping you going there.
And it's you that's got to find it. Nobody's going to hand it to you. You got to search for it yourself. That goes back to the thing, right? Warfighter without a mission is a dead warfighter. So your mission is to find a mission.
The mindset thing is so important. I want to go back to where you were saying earlier about how no one can make you angry. And like we hear that, our whole lives. You hear that as kids, even sometimes, like, no one can make you angry. Like, that is the dumbest thing ever. Like, this person is clearly pissing me off. Like this, but it's true. And it's interesting. When I was in, I ended up getting sent to mental health for some things. And it was interesting because I remember getting to a point where, I'd been to anger management a couple times, been to different therapists, and it gets to the point where you hear people say, like, "Oh, these are things you should be angry about," but let's try being. Have you thought about being less angry? You realize the response isn't great, and it's like, and I remember a point where I went and saw like I'd seen a couple therapists, and they were like, "Man, the level," and I was not in a good spot, but the level is too high. They didn't feel comfortable, so I kept getting shifted to someone different, which further validated that may make me feel like I'm broken, and I remember sitting down with this lady, and it was like she's like 5'0", and I go in, I start telling her, and she says, "Hey, what's going on?" And I started listing out the things that are bothering me. And at this point, it's like a mantra. I've gone through it so many times. And she goes, "Whoa, whoa." She goes, I don't care. She's like, "I don't care what's bothering you." She said, what's going good in your life?" And I was like, nothing. Like nothing. Absolutely nothing. And she immediately she was, "Okay, well then, like, why haven't you killed yourself? So why haven't you done that?" And I was like, "Whoa, that's a little intense." Like, I was like, "Well, I've got a kid, and I don't know, like start going through it." And she goes, "Oh, so there are good things." She's like, "There are good things in your life." She's like, "Well, why don't you just take your family and leave?" I was like, "Well, then I'm going to go to jail for going AWOL." And she's like, "Okay, so this is better than that." And I remember sitting there like going like, "Man, that's such a weird way to look at it." And she had me write a happiness journal, which I told her at the time, I was like, "This is the dumbest tree hugger hippie crap I've ever heard of. You want me to write down everything that makes me happy?"
Yeah.
And of course, she put stipulations on it. She's like, "You can't be happy that something negative happened to someone else. You can't be happy for lack of a negative. Like, well, at least they didn't keep us till midnight today." And I told her, I said, "I'm going to do this, and it's not going to work. I'm going to do it just to prove you wrong." And the first day, there's like one or two things, and then a couple days later, it's like, man, this is a big list. I'm gonna have to go face this woman and tell her there's a lot of good stuff going on in my life that I'm just and it was just rewiring it. And I remember at one point I looked at her and I was like, hey, like, we're having a problem. Like, what if I'm happy that I noticed something that made me happy? And she goes, well, write that down. I'm like, well, then I'm going to be in an endless cycle of happy. I'm going to be an endless cycle of happy. I'm not going to have anything left in my day but writing this stupid thing. And she goes, oh, you poor thing. and it was wild because it really opened my eyes up to like where you focus creates so much of our perception, how we perceive the world. And it can be changed so quickly with structure. And and there was a point where it was a few weeks into this where we had a night, our sergeant told us we were going to be staying there all night, and he left. And it's like, well, what are we sitting around doing? In infantry, when we're not at war, you're just kind of like, when you're out overseas, you sit against the wall for the most part. And everyone's just so like, I'm sitting there reading a book and everyone's going around so frustrated and like, man, can you believe he's doing this? And I was like, yeah, man, I can. This is what he does. Like, of course I believe it. Like, I don't know. Like, aren't you mad about it? I don't know. Like, not, I guess, like, not really. And it was weird because I felt like I was kind of in, like, watching this almost in second person. Like, what's going on? Why am I not upset? Why am I? Oh, because everything's fine. Because this is just normal and there's other good stuff going on. And I wasn't hyper focused on that. And it really
wasn't in your control and you realized it.
Right. And it's funny how those things, like when it hits you and you realize like, wow, people, like, they're right. No one can like, I'm making myself angry despite everything that's going on. And people don't quite realize that. And it's hard. It's really hard. And the other thing I remember when I started really pushing into some of the therapy stuff, because like, okay, this is working. This stuff there's some functional value to this. And I remember in CBD where they were talking about like anger being a secondary emotion, where it's like, yeah, when you get angry, it's because you're hurt or something else. And it's just a lot easier to direct it outward. And I think for a lot of people, like, if we realize that like, especially for veterans, like, what are we struggling with here? It's that you feel lonely, that you feel no value. You have all those feelings that you don't, it's like, man, I don't know what to do with this. And then we get angry about it. And I love your approach where it's like, hey, let's not focus on the why you feel this way. Let's not delve into this. Let's focus on what can we do to fix it. Because that's the important part. Like, don't sit there and go like, oh, there's a brick wall here. Man, we can't get across that. We can't get across it. Well, like, why was this wall here? And you can go through and look into everything else, or you got someone who's just going to go grab a ladder, put it up, and go over. And that's like, I love that approach that you got. I think that's so good. It's addressing the issues. It's addressing them all as a whole, seeing how everything impacts everything else. And then you're taking and saying, all right, let's focus on how much we need to focus on to figure out the game plan, to figure out what we can do. And like you mentioned a second ago, it's what we can control. Because if we can't control certain steps, then that's
the only thing that you can control is your reaction.
Yeah.
That's the only
Yeah.
thing. Yeah, I
Wow.
tell veterans all the time, I don't care what happened to you yesterday, last week, last month when you were a kid. It doesn't matter anymore. What
Right.
matters is your ability to make a choice going forward. And that choice needs to be something that's going to work out for your long-term benefit. And
Hmm.
if you're making choices that are not working out for your long-term benefit, then you're in for a hard life.
Yeah. And that's something that I'll tell you, not just veterans, but our society in general needs to get more of that accountability, how we move forward. It's a very Carl Jung way of looking at things versus the way a lot of current psychology tries to handle things. So,
Yeah, we don't need to keep talking about the bad stuff that's happened in your life. You know,
yeah,
if there's trauma that causes you a physical reaction today, then EMDR, brain spotting, there are some techniques that can help to move that memory from being an experience again to being a memory, right?
hmm,
And once that happens, you shouldn't be triggered anymore. You shouldn't get that activation. You can still remember the bad thing that happened, but it's not going to cause you to have to get up and leave a restaurant or feel
right.
like you're in panic mode. Those are legitimate things that you got to go back in the past and deal with. But
Hmm.
but the other stuff, it's time to let it go because it's in the
Yeah.
past.
That's one of the things I really liked about CPT, where it's like, hey, let's focus on right now these things, how we address these things, how we look at stuff, really look at how you handle it, and kind of redirect those thoughts. And then, of course, then hey, you can work into some of those deeper things and address those root beliefs about yourself. And it's a process. It's not just, hey, let's just think about this whenever you think about it. It's structured, because I think a lot of stuff is it's habit. That's one of the things I've been realizing more and more over the years, that so many of the things that we think is based on how we feel. It's like, oh well, when this happens, when I feel that way, yada yada yada. It's like how we react, how we have built a pattern of reacting to those things and thinking about those things. And even if you try to adjust the thinking, if you've still got a habit built up, like you've got to break that habit almost first. And you can't break habits without structure.
Yeah, and it takes studies say 21 days to break a habit.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
And if you're
you have to replace that habit with something else.
right, and I think for a lot of people it's like, well, okay, I know what I need to do differently, so next time this trigger comes up, then I'm going to work on that. I'm going to try to apply this the next time that comes up. And it's like, man, that's like, you got to find ways to practice it. You have to find ways to work through those things and build those habits actively every day,
Well,
because
and it's also part of having a plan, right?
yeah.
Because in the military, if you know, you may remember, I don't know, different generations. Do they, when it comes to weapon malfunction, do they still use sports?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. What do you remember? What sports stands for?
Slap, pull, observe, release, tap, squeeze.
Exactly. Yeah.
I
So
haven't thought about that in forever. As soon as you said it, like, yep.
yeah, that's because you knew that someday, or the people that trained you knew that someday you would have a weapon jam, and this is how you would get out of it. So when it happens, you didn't have to go, oh crap, I have a weapon jam. Now what do I do? You do react to it. So the
Hmm.
things in your life that cause you those triggering type of reactions, the time to deal with that is not when it happens. The time to
Right.
deal with that is ahead of time. What is your plan when this happens, right? And if you put a plan together ahead of time, then when that happens, then execute the plan. And that the therapist is a great person to talk to work through how, what do I do? What kind of an immediate action drill do I put together for if I feel panic in a crowded restaurant, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then that's a great time to go back and some of the, I don't know how much time we have left, but some of the things to do with the somatic responses in your body, right? If you right now, if I'm talking to somebody that told me that, I would say I want you to mentally go into a crowded restaurant right now. And as you do that, tell me, where do you feel in your body? And then if they tell me wherever that unpleasantness is they feel in their body, now there's several things that we can do to try to help resolve that. But the first and the easiest one is focus on the unpleasant feeling in your body for a minute and breathe and see what happens. And usually the unpleasant feeling subsides.
Right.
But what happens when you get into that situation, you don't take a minute to say, I am feeling this in my body right now, and focusing on it and then breathing and letting it subside. Usually it takes control of your next reaction instead of you bringing awareness to it and focusing on it.
Yeah, yeah. As far as time, I'm good. I'm loving this conversation. You're talking about so many absolutely
I just
incredible
need to
things.
check one thing to make sure I'm not supposed to be meeting with somebody.
Okay.
My calendar is supposed to be blocked off so that nobody can schedule anything on Monday morning unless I want to.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody scheduled something. And I sent him a note and said, that is not going to work. Let's move later. And he didn't respond to it. So we can keep going for a bit.
All right. But yeah, the response in yourself, like that's, as you're talking about that, like how your body feels, like where you feel in your body, it's so different because again, like all these therapeutic things that a lot of it's stuff that really we should be teaching people as they're growing up. We need to teach this stuff like with accountability as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the feelings part, and it's funny because like when I went through CPT and I loved it. I love CPT because again, it's like systematic, go through and analyze everything, and it feels good. What was interesting is I realized later on that it's also kind of systematic bottling in a way. And I remember I was talking with someone, they're like, man, you seem to bottle a lot. I was like, I'm not bottling anything. When I feel that, I immediately think about what's going on. I think about all the patterns of problematic thinking. Oh, I go through all this and then I decide that it doesn't bother me anymore. And right when I said it, and I realize that it doesn't bother me, or I choose that it doesn't bother me, and I go, oh, that seems like stuffing down feelings. Like, wow. And the person looks at me and goes, yeah, that's not bottling at all. I'm like, like, and I saw there's a therapist actually with my kids, and they were talking about that, like, how do you feel in different parts of your body? And again, I thought it sounded really weird. Like, what do you mean how I feel in different parts of my body? And she gave us this little gingerbread man thing and said to like draw in or color in each part of the body how it felt. And my kid's doing it, no problem. And I was like, I don't know. Like at the time, I just filled the head in blue because like I feel like I'm drowning. Like but I don't know beyond that. And then we did this little like kind of movement activities and stuff to kind of like work on just feeling our bodies. And then she gives us another little gingerbread man thing. She says, all right, now fill it out. Now say how you feel. And I'll be danged if I didn't know exactly how each part of my body felt. And I was like, I looked at her like, you sly dog, you tricked me. and it was so wild because I'm sitting here going like, man, I've been through a lot of therapy. I've dealt with a lot of these things, but there's still that disconnect with our body. And I think one of the things that I've found, and I don't know if this is right or wrong, but like, I think for a lot of people, like the therapy stuff that we're most resistant to, I think that's our body saying, this is going to be meaningful and it's going to hurt a little bit to go through it. And then we immediately like block it out. So when it becomes something where it's like, oh man, is this what I want to do? And when there's that,
why that is?
What's that?
You know why that is?
Why?
The human is always going to move towards pleasure and away from pain.
Yeah.
It's just human condition, right? So, so why does a 4-star general on active duty today have basic airborne jump wings? Right? When they were a cadet, probably military academy or ROTC, somebody said, hey, you can volunteer and go to jump school this summer. So you give up a month of your summer to go to Georgia in July and August. And July and August in Georgia is not a pleasant experience. Airborne school, I could argue that 1981 airborne school was harder than 2026 airborne school, but in any case, it's a difficult experience to go through, right? It's not easy. It's not a cakewalk. So it's kind of hard to go through. So you give up your summer, you go through something hard, and you get these shiny silver wings to put on your uniform. And then in a 30-year career, you never jump out of an airplane again. Why did that general go to airborne school in the first place, right? What would have happened if the Army said, you know what, if you serve in the 82nd or any of the new airborne units that they've stood up, like the 11th or whatever it is in Alaska, Ranger Regiment, Special Forces, you don't need to wear jump wings because you can tell by the patch on your uniform that you jump out of airplanes. So we don't need no more jump wings. We're going to stop issuing jump wings. So now would that young cadet give up their summer, go to Fort Benning in August to go through jump school because they could do it because it's good training, but they're not going to get any jump wings on the uniform? Would they do it? Probably not, right?
Probably not.
So in this case, the vision of having those shiny silver wings on their uniform was more pleasurable than the pain of going to Fort Benning in August and going to jump school. But they never intended to be an airborne unit again because you serve in the Army for 30 years and you're a general, you could jump out of airplanes more than 5 times. Right. So it's a pleasure over pain thing. Ranger school. If there was no Ranger tab at the end of Ranger school, I would have quit on like day 2. But I had the vision of, I want that Ranger tab, so it's worth all of the pain that it's going to take to get it. So now you bring that kind of an attitude into your daily life. When you're talking about the difficult things that you have to do now, whether it's fixing a relationship or overcoming trauma or getting in better shape or looking for a better job or budgeting, whatever those things are, there's pain associated with all of those things, right? If you don't have a vision of the pleasure you're going to achieve after you've worked through the pain, then you're going to divert to something else pleasurable all the time. So if living within a budget is painful, but if you can maintain this budget, then you know you're going to be able to go to Hawaii next year, right? Then the pleasure of going to Hawaii is greater than the pain of having to save money today. If you don't care about Hawaii, then you're going to start going to Starbucks every day because it feels really good to get that caramel whatever, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to divert to something that gives you pleasure. And if the long-term goal, if that objective has more pleasure than the pain it takes to get there, then you'll tolerate and work through the pain to achieve it. If you don't have a vision of what your relationship with your significant other looks like when it's 100%, then you're not going to do the painful things today that's going to get it to 100%. You're going to go have an affair. You're going to get divorced. You're going to break up because it's more pleasurable to do that than deal with the issues.
Yeah, that's, it's interesting how much of this is like, a lot of this for vets, but for so many other people. I mean,
vets are people too.
What's that?
Vets are people too.
They are. It's like
everybody has some form of trauma.
Yeah. Well, so I've got 3 teenage kids, and one of the things that we've struggled with over the past few years is they have things they want, they have outcomes they want, but then they're not putting in the work to get there. And you see someone that's like, oh, well, I want to be like, I want to be on the baseball team. It's like, okay, well, we've got, pitching stuff, batting nets, all this. Like, when do you go work on that? And they don't, and then like a week before tryouts, and now I'm going to go push for it. Or, hey, I want to wrestle, but then it's like, all right, are you going to work out in the off season? Are you going to do the extra stuff? Like, well, no. And there's a lot of us like fighting them almost to try to get them to do those things. Like, you need to do this, you need to do this. And we ended up stepping back about a year ago and said, like, hey, listen, guys, I care about you, but I don't care if you're not successful in these things. Like, that's a you issue. Like, if you want this and you don't have you got to put the work in. And if you're not putting the work in, then that's okay, but it's something that you just don't care about as much as you're saying you do. And you need to accept that. Like, don't perform for these things. Don't do it because we're telling you to. Find out what you want to do, what you want to do enough to work at it. And we started doing like a weekly check-in where I'd be like, hey, what's your long-term goal? And it could be anything as long as it's a year out. And then create some benchmarks along the way, like you're talking about with the mapping. Like, what are some things that are going to, like, hey, if you're benching 150 and you want to bench 200 pounds, well, then let's break up every fifth of the way there, 10 more pounds. That's your benchmark. And then we'd ask them, like, what are you going to do this week? What are you going to do this week that's going to get you there? And we don't control that. We don't tell them what, hey, I want you to do this, that, or anything. It's just, what are you going to do? It has to be measurable, has to be specific. Not like, hey, I'm going to work out 3 times a week. Is that like, all right, which days are you going to do it and what workout are you going to do? We started doing that, and it was amazing how quickly their actions started lining up. Because I stopped, like when they say this is what I'm going to do, I go, okay, cool. And the next week we just sit down and go, all right, what was your plan? How did it go? What were the barriers that you came across? And then what are you going to do this next week? And it was we've had a lot of conversations about how frustration happens when expectations and effort don't align. So it's like, and then if they're like, yeah, I didn't do well at this. I didn't get this done. Like, okay, well, are you going to adjust it or are you going to adjust your goal? Like, either way is fine. You just let me know. And as they started doing it, you start seeing some points where it's like, okay, well, I didn't get that done that week, but I'm going to try it again this week. Okay, cool. And then sometimes they get it, they figure it out and they just push through and get it done the next week. Sometimes they don't. And sometimes a couple of weeks, they just don't get it done. And then they go, you know what? I don't feel like this goal is for me.
You know,
I'll
one of
fill
the
you.
things that you could do, those are all great things. One of the things that you could do when they come to you and they say, I want to bench press 200 pounds or I want to be on the wrestling team or whatever, is why.
Yeah.
Why is that important to you?
So
Because
that's
that why boils down to the ultimate, the vision. That's the pleasure of achieving it. And if
yeah.
it's, you know, it could range from because I want to impress somebody else, because I want to kick somebody's ass, because I want to get a college scholarship, but whatever, because my friends are doing it, whatever that thing is, if
Mhm.
that because, and that's the time that it's, for me, that's the time it's okay to ask the why questions because
Yeah.
you want to identify what's the motivation behind what they want to do.
And
But
that
that
actually is a part of it is we'll
that is
ask,
what becomes the vision, right?
yeah.
So why do you want to be on the wrestling team? Because I want to be in better shape. Why do you want to be in better shape? Because I want to impress the girls. Why do you want to impress the girls? Because I like this one girl. Okay, so it's not about the wrestling team. It's about impressing this one girl, right? So then you
Yep.
start, but you can work with that to help get the right motivation, and then
Mhm.
and then once they identify, you know, why do I want to bench press 200 pounds? Well, because all my friends are doing it. Okay, so why are they doing it? Well, because they want to be on the starting lineup for the football team. Okay,
Yep.
do you want to be on the starting lineup of the football team? Is that important to you? Yes. Then you start, what would it look like if you were on the starting lineup? Could you imagine, could they take a piece of paper and a pen and draw themselves in the uniform of the starting lineup of the football team, right? Take a picture, use AI, whatever it is, but generate an
Mhm.
image of them in that uniform and then print it off. And if diet is an issue, exercise is an issue, whatever it is, put that picture someplace where they can see it because that visualization, I am going to be, I am that, drives the decisions that they're going to make today to achieve it.
I like that a lot. So we actually do have a why, like why is it important to them question right after the long term
Mhm.
goal. Uh, but we do it. It's you have to pick a why, and it has to be something internal. It can't be, well, I'm going to do this. I want to do this because that'll make this person happy, or that person. It has to be something that like because
But
like
that's
you
the
can't control.
opportunity to go, why do you want to make that person happy? Right?
Right. And that's
Why
where
do
I'm looking at what we're doing it. And I like the way you're pitching it is we start with external things like, yeah, like, hey, you're going to work out. Maybe you don't make it on the football team, but what's there? Do you have something internally where even if that doesn't happen, this is going to be meaningful to you? But I like the way you're doing it where it starts more open and then you can dive in deep because the way that we're doing it, there's some of them that could still be a real thing. They have a real drive for an external validation. And we miss the opportunity to dive deeper in and to figure out what drives that. That's that's good. I like that. It's yeah, there's just so much in our society. I feel like the accountability gets kind of left. They
you
don't.
ever watch the Grease movie with John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John?
Oh yeah.
The opening scene, they sing a song, and
Mm-hmm.
the chorus is "Tell me more, tell me more." And whenever I'm counseling anybody that has any kind of relationship issues, I tell them to use the Grease rule. And the Grease rule is tell me more, tell me more. So somebody says whatever it is that they say, that must make you feel happy. That must be frustrating. Reflect their emotion back. Tell me more about that.
Yeah.
I want to be on the wrestling team. Well, that sounds exciting. Tell me more about that. That's a way of getting to why do you want to do that, right? And well, you know, because I like the uniforms. Okay, well, tell me more about that. Just whatever it is. But if you can go a couple of tell me mores into it, you start to uncover the real reason that they want to do something. When I was in junior high school, I wanted to take karate lessons,
Mhm.
and my dad said no, no, I'm not going to allow you to do that. He never said, why do you want to take karate lessons? It's because there's a bully that keeps chasing my ass around the block, and I
Right.
want to be able to defend myself. He never asked me those questions. So, so if he had asked me that, then I might not have gotten karate lessons, but we might have had a different solution to deal with the bully, right? But
Right.
but he never got to that part, and I wasn't gonna just come out and say, "Hey, I want karate lessons because a bully's chasing me around the block."
Right.
So the tell me more is incredibly important to help us understand what the other person is really dealing with.
Yeah, I can definitely see where applying that more would be very beneficial, because otherwise you end up unintentionally shutting people down before.
You're seeing things through your filter, not their filter.
Yeah, it's that's good. So, all right, I want to kind of come back here and look at, all right, for someone out there, the whole point of this, like the Beyond the Yellow, I love your story. I love how it's like so many steps here that led you to that, and how you guys are doing so much. And you started small. You started off with just the heart of do what we can do. And that's what this is about. So for other people that are out there that are thinking the same kind of things, who are thinking, man, someone should do something about this, whether it's a veterans issue or anything in their community, and they're thinking someone should do something, or maybe they have that feeling already that maybe I could do something. Like, first of all, what do you think is the biggest things that stop people from stepping up and taking those
Somebody
actions?
else will do it.
Yeah.
Tell somebody else will do it. I'm out walking my dog this morning, and I'm walking past the high school baseball stadium, and there's a plastic water bottle laying on the ground, and I'm like, I should pick that up. And then my brain said, they got people that'll come out and do that. And then I went ahead and picked it up and threw it in the trash, right? But
Yeah.
that it's I think people will be like, somebody else will do it. There's a homeless guy on the street corner. Somebody should do something. There's somebody else that'll help them, right? So I think that's the first thing is they think somebody else will take care of it. And I think the other thing is people get wrapped up in their own lives so much that they think they don't have time to do anything else. And when they do that, they rob themselves of the richness of helping somebody else, somebody or something. I tell veterans all the time, if they're feeling a lack of purpose, if they don't have a mission, then go pick the thing that you like and go volunteer there. Whether it's packing food for Meals on Wheels, or it's volunteering at an animal shelter, or at the VA pushing around a wheelchair, but go volunteer someplace and make it a routine to do that. Or go, for when my schedule allowed me to. I haven't been able to do it lately, but I volunteered with hospice, and I said, I want you tell me what veterans you have that are in hospice, and once a week I will go sit for an hour with each one of those veterans. And you get the opportunity to sit with somebody that's at the end of their life. They're dying. There's nothing when they go into hospice. Nobody's going to do any heroic things to try to save their life. They're just going to die. And
Right.
so, and a lot of times they're super old, so they don't have very many friends, and they may live remote, so they don't have family nearby. So they're all by themselves in some place, just waiting for the time to come. And so you go in and just sit there with them, and you say, hey, tell me about your service. And you get somebody that hasn't talked to anybody in a week, and all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, I was in Germany, in 1960 or whatever. And well, tell me about that. I just let them talk. But things like that can be very fulfilling to just go in, and when there's somebody that you don't have to help, you don't have to do anything for them at all, and you choose to go give a little bit of your time, that starts to put meaning and purpose back into your life because it gets you outside of your own problems. Here, this person is dying, and I'm worried about whether or not, I can go on vacation next year, or whatever that is, right? It starts putting things in perspective is huge. And the other piece to that is, I started to mention it earlier, is when you feel like you're going to be angry with somebody, the easiest hack to stop the anger process is to generate some form of empathy for the other person. Even if it's to say to yourself, this person must have had a horrible childhood for them to act like this. You don't wish that anybody had a horrible childhood,
Right.
but if you say to yourself, this person must have had a really bad experience in their life, or maybe they just found out they have cancer, or maybe their spouse is leaving them. If you create a narrative that can create empathy for the other person, your reaction to them is going to be different.
It's a very Dale Carnegie way to look at things. I like that. Yeah. And it always assumes good intent.
Yeah, there was, I read something somewhere that it said, some people, they talk about treat everybody as if today is your last day on earth, right? If you knew that you were going to die tomorrow, how would you treat other people? And it said that's not the way to do it. What you want to do is you want to treat other people like today is their last day on earth.
That's significantly different.
Yep.
Yeah, because there's so much about that's different. Yeah, because if it's your last day, then you would look at that as, hey, I don't have any accountability here.
Right.
But for someone else, it's very different. Yeah, I think that's a big part, is how we treat other people and what we assume, rather than assuming bad intent, which we often go to.
Right.
But we assume that
Self-preservation thing.
Yeah, I mentioned the Dale Carnegie thing. Like, I don't know if you ever read that book, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Mm-hmm.
Like, absolutely amazing book. I read that after I left the service, and it was life changing. It really was. And I remember one of the biggest things is always remind myself that they are exactly who I would be under the same circumstances. Like, you had the same upbringing, the same experiences, like what things led them to that point. And yeah, if we all thought that way a little different, it would change the world a lot. And yeah, like the other part, like you said, just take action, do little things. I think a lot of times we think it's too big for us to do anything. But
the starfish story, right?
Mm.
The starfish story where there's a boy and his father walking along a seashore, and there's hundreds of starfish laying on the sand, and the boy picks one up and throws it back in the water, and then he picks another one up and throws it back in the water, and his dad says, why are you doing that? There's hundreds of starfish. There's no way you're going to throw all the starfish back in the water. And the boy said, well, I can't throw all the starfish back in the water, but I can throw this one back in the water.
Yeah. That's a good way to look at it. You can't fix everything, but you can fix little bits. If everybody focused on like, hey, one little thing, if it's, whether it's donating, let's skipping your Starbucks once a month and donating that to a good cause, whether it's, like I said, go out and help set up food for Meals on Wheels or anything. Like, if we did that, not only would the impact of people doing one or two good deeds, heck, a year, not only would that create so much positive movement and impact, but what that would do in our own heads and changing our own perspectives. So like you said, get out of our own perspective and see things from other people's, and seeing how, yeah, maybe our problems aren't quite as bad as we think when we see it in comparison. Yeah. Well,
Luke, I am coming up on a hard stop here.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was just saying we just hit the 2-hour mark, and yeah, I'm gonna have to end this. I'm sure we could go for days talking about this stuff, but yeah, let's we'll end it there. And man, this was amazing. It really was. Karl, loved having you on here, loved hearing your story, and hearing about the impact that Gallant Few is doing in the Texas community. So yeah, for anyone else, hey, if you're watching this, I want you guys to go check them out, see if you can support them in any way, or if you're needing help, go check them out for that as well. All right. Karl, you have a wonderful rest of your day.
You do the same.
All right. Bye.